And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. We're coming to you live here on Tuesday morning. Speaking of live, George, a lot of fun. Our post-game week one reaction live on YouTube. So we will be doing that each and every Sunday after the game. So if you are a podcast listener, unfortunately, we're not able to upload it to the podcast feed. So each and every Sunday, check out our YouTube page, Blue Horseshoe Podcast. We are live after every single game. That's where you can catch our post-game reactions. It is still living there, so we're going to go back and listen to our initial thoughts of Anthony Richardson's debut, of how Shane Steichen did as a first-time head coach, how the defense played, how the run game didn't show up, George. All of that right there on our YouTube page, Blue Horseshoe Pod. Subscribe, and you'll get an alert anytime we do go live. Again, that is our plan each and every Sunday in the regular season. Live post-game reaction only, exclusively on the tube. Let's get into one of the negatives, George, from Sunday still, and that's the run game. I think sometimes we can look at the run game one of two ways. The running backs stink or the offensive line stinks. And I was rewatching the game from Sunday, George, and I don't think the offensive line played as bad as, especially the stats indicate. I thought pass protection, they were pretty solid for the most part all game. But you look at the run game, where your running backs are averaging 1.5 yards per carry, you can easily say, oh, the running backs stink, but also they had no holes to run through. Honestly, George, I think a large part of Sunday's ineptitude running the ball was on the running backs themselves.
Yeah, and some of that's going to be inexperience. You had guys towards the end of the game, Evan Funk, I'm just putting them together. Evan Funk, one guy. Evan Hall and Jake Funk, obviously making their NFL debuts for the most part for Funk and definitely for Hall. And then Deon Jackson he wasn't Kadarius Toney, I'll give him that. But it was probably the next worst performance in week one by a skill position player. It just 2 fumbles, not a lot of vision, not a lot of wiggle from him. It was a rough debut. There's no other way around it. And they really rode him for most of that game. Although I will say, if you noticed, he did get benched, after the first fumble. And if Evan Hall hadn't been injured, I'm not sure we would have seen Deon Jackson again in that game. He came back in after the injury, and then he got banged up himself, and Jake Funk got out there. But it was not pretty all the way around. I do think the line, it wasn't dominant. It wasn't back to where you want them to be, but steps forward and certainly progression for them, which is what we've been talking about all spring and all summer. You want to see them just, build and build and build and, slowly get back to where we know that they can be. And hopefully that'll take place. But I think I said this Sunday, but in terms of how well the line played versus some of the stats, and how they played out, the stat of the day to me is still Josh Allen, 3 sacks for 3 yards. I mean, it tells you so much about, and he was a big part of the run game too. I mean, when you talk about, he had those 3 sacks and they were all right around the line of scrimmage, which is not really on the offensive line. He's a freak. He's super quick. He's super strong. And I think if the running back hesitates at all, if they're unsure about where they're going to go or they're unsure about their next move, the next thing they know, Josh Allen's decapitating them as he did once to Deon Jackson during that game.
And that's my frustration, because it's that's where a lot of these runs went to die with Deon Jackson. Is Josh Allen off the edge, where you watch the Colts are clearly not blocking because they assume, okay, we're going to run up the middle. A guy on the edge is just going to be too late. And with Jonathan Taylor, George, it's probably the case. But with Deon Jackson, it's not. And that's a thing where, again, you really feel JT's lack of presence there in the run game is just because I think a lot of tackles that are made by Josh Allen and others by the Jaguars are not made or made 5 yards further down the field if it is an all-pro guy in Jonathan Taylor compared to a guy in Deon Jackson who, you mentioned before, no wiggle. It's would it kill him one guy miss? 13 rush attempts. I don't think he made one guy miss whatsoever. Few pass catches as well, I should say. It's he runs right into the defender. No jukes made, no attempt to make the first guy miss, where again, if you see Jonathan Taylor, how many times you make the first guy miss, all of a sudden now the field opens up and now you're talking about 20, 25, 30-yard game, maybe a home run house call compared to a 2-yard game or compared to a run into the line of scrimmage for 1 yard. And it's you mentioned before, right? Deon Jackson was benched after the first fumble and really injuries forced him back on the field and fumbled again. But it's also one of those things, George, where it was 13 carries for Deon Jackson. I believe it was 2 for Jake Funk and 1 for Evan Hull. And I believe his first fumble, Deon's first fumble came, I think it was on the 4th drive, possibly the 5th drive. It was after the first touchdown. But by that point, like, the run game was not affected whatsoever. Like, you could easily pull the plug on any of the first 3 or 4 drives before the first fumble came, because that run game was non-existent. With Deon Jackson, it was just basic. I mean, usually you'd be happy, honestly, if it was 3 yards on a cloud of dust. It was like a half yard and a cloud of dust anytime he was running the ball up the middle.
I think that's one of the things that you can really criticize Shane Steichen for in week 1. There's a lot of people upset with the play calling, and as I did most of the time when Frank Reich was here, I still think it's more execution than it was the plays that were called. And that's always going to be a balance that you got to look at. But I do think he said all week long, so we running back by committee, and he was going to ride the hot hand. I think they should have got Evan Hull into the game earlier. I really do. He looked like the best running back in the very brief time. Now, we're talking about a minor – when we talk about a small sample size, this was a really small sample size. But he had the best run by running back. It got called back by a penalty. But he had the best run by running back all day for the Colts. And I think he just looked more of the part. And then, unfortunately, he got hurt. And now we're not going to see him for a while. So I think that's what was already a thin position is even more of a concern now. They were down there at one point. Paul was out of the game, and we know now he's going to miss some time. We don't know how much time. Shane Steichen said Monday it'll be some time. And then
which for Shane, by the way, George, is kind of specific.
Yeah, he didn't say it was little. He didn't say he's going to miss a little time. He didn't say it was a little injury. So there's a chance Evan Hull is deceased. I don't know. I mean, I'm worried when Shane doesn't use the word little. But there was a moment there where Deon Jackson got banged up too, and Jake Funk was the last running back standing. Jackson was able to come back in, but that's a pretty frightening situation. I don't know who was next in line to go back there. I mean, DeForest Buckner had some moves. Maybe you're going to put him, and maybe he was the emergency running back. I don't know. He did outrush the running backs on Sunday, so maybe deserve to look back there. But it's all signs are pointing to, in all seriousness, somebody being signed this week. I mean, Zach Moss is still questionable, I would say. He's obviously been practicing, but he missed a lot of time, and when you do that, it takes time to get back into football shape. Maybe he is ready to go Sunday. If I had, gun to my head, I would probably say he is ready to go Sunday. But how much? Is he a 20, 25 carry guy on Sunday? I wouldn't think so. Not yet. We'll see. Maybe he is. He definitely seems like a tough guy from the half year or so that he's been here. He definitely seems like a guy who's a workhorse type of guy, and I think the effort and the toughness and all that's there for him. But realistically, probably more of a 10 carry guy on Sunday if he's able to go. And so without Evan Hull, Deon Jackson back in the mix. Is Jake Funk up again? You still have those freebie. You got 2 more of those on the practice squad up and down for him. But I just think common sense tells you, and probably by the time, you're listening to this now, that move's already happened in all likelihood. But common sense tells you there's a running back coming from somewhere.
I mean, they're right. There's no other choice, right? At this point, like, without John Taylor for a bare minimum, at least another 3 games, you look, like I said, it's just like, even if Zach Moss returns, I'm with you where it's like, it's still going to be a limited role. Even if he starts the game, it's still like one of those where, I mean, basically missed all training camp, George. So it's like, it's something where I think you're right. You're talking about 10, 12, maybe 15 touches, which I think will still be on the high side for his first game back after, again, basically missing a month and a half of training camp because he got hurt right at the beginning and missed through, the duration, just returned to practice last week. So it's not like one of those things where he's in game shape, ready to go and take on a 20, 25 carry workload and play most of the snaps. And so that's a frustrating part where it's just like injuries might force Deon Jackson to be back in the lineup again in week number 2. And that's just, again, we talk about Anthony Richardson's development, not what you want. You cannot have that because you need some sort of semblance of a run game. And I don't think, like, the offensive line, like I said before, it wasn't great. It wasn't 2020, 2021 version of the offensive line where they were just bulldozing guys into submission and creating holes that me and you could run through. It's still work in progress. I thought a good step in the right direction in the sense that I think some of the lapses were more communication and mental than physical, which again, you can fix those a lot easier than just saying, oh boy, Will Fry's getting blown off the line of scrimmage. Can't do much to fix that if that's the case. So at least like there is improvement, but again, overall, I don't think they played as bad as the especially the run game numbers would suggest. And it's like, is there, let me ask you this, George. Like I said, it's tough now because of the injuries, right? We don't know about Zach Moss's availability for Sunday and how much he can play. Evan Hull is going to be out for some time, which again, for Shane Steichen, that's a big statement for him saying, so that's, he's not going to be around anytime soon. So right now it's Deon Jackson, Jake Funk, and really right now, nobody else. I mean, Deon Jackson's game, George, on Sunday should indicate he should be cut. Right? 2 fumbles, 13 carries for 14 yards? Like there was nothing positive or redeeming about his performance in the run game, in the pass game, in ball security, whatever. Like, the frustrating thing is his play says he should not be playing. But the reality is with injuries, even if they sign someone, like that's still like if they sign someone today, George, let's say we're recording this on Tuesday, you still expect them? Like, I don't expect whoever they sign, and it's again, could be Kareem Hunt, could be insert whoever, journeyman running back that's not getting a lot of carries anyway. It's not going to be a big home run hitter that's going to drastically change the offense. You're still picking up a running back off the street in season, which is not exactly, high on your options. Still, at least for feel like week number 2 going down to Houston, this run game is not going to be much better than it should be in week 1.
No, that's 100%, I think, accurate. And, the same things that we were talking about Moss not being ready because he missed training camp. Well, whoever they bring in missed training camp too. So,
True.
They're probably not going to be a workhorse back. If they are, it's probably going to show. I would think maybe these guys are in great condition and a lot of them stay in great shape because they want to be ready to go right away. And obviously running backs, you probably have to have somebody else in on third down. I know they're going to have pass protection and those kind of things down pat right away. But, the holes stay the same, right? You read a defense the same no matter what uniform you're wearing. So in that regard, I think running backs can probably get up and going faster than maybe some other positions. But you're still conditioning, there's a lot of other elements that are in there that I think are going to be a factor here. So whether it's, Kareem Hunt, whether it's somebody like Leonard Fournette, whether it's the return of Toriano Clinton, I just don't think you're going to be able to throw that guy out there and say, here, carry the ball 25 times, be the workhorse running back. I don't think it's going to make sense. I think you're going to see some Zach Moss, some of the new guy, probably some of either Deon Jackson or Jake Funk too, just because I think the reality is they're going to be forced into that.
I know. And like Shane said before, we're going to ride the hot hand in the running game. You're going to try it. Like I think the only thing you can get him on for the run game is like you should have tried something to change it up earlier instead of kind of riding Deon Jackson's no game. So you're right. There's not right now a running back that has taken command of the game and said, you can't take me out. And so you're right. It's just basically mixing and matching, throwing what against the wall and seeing what sticks in the run game. And that's kind of like I said, it's going to be a carousel. Just, okay, let's see what this guy can do. See what this guy can do and hope one person, at least for one game down in H-Town, can take over the game and again, make better on what we saw in week number 1. But let me ask you this, George, because we anticipate a running back being signed, right? We don't know who, but we anticipate a guy being signed this week and hopefully being ready to go for week number 2. You mentioned the 2 big names on the market, Kareem Hunt, Leonard Fournette. Obviously, Hunt was in the building for a workout with the Colts. Didn't come to fruition back in training camp. And Leonard Fournette is obviously being a 4th overall pick, I believe. Big name as well. Does the name, George, who they sign, tell you any indication of their thoughts on Jonathan Taylor's readiness? Because again, you had Jonathan Taylor's report come out about Jonathan Taylor on Sunday that, hey, he should be good to come off PUP by week 5. Not a shock, considering most people don't think he was that hurt to be on PUP in the first place. So not exactly a shock that he should be ready to come off and at least be ready for some sort of game action in week 5. Does the name at all that they sign indicate to you like their anticipation of how much Jonathan Taylor will play in week 5 and week 6?
I mean, if it's Fournette, then you obviously know that they're going to the postseason because you don't sign playoff Lenny unless you know that you're ready to go to the playoffs. But I don't think so for a lot of reasons. One of which is after week 1, veteran contracts are not guaranteed. So you can literally cut whoever they sign at any point. So if you bring in Hunt or Fournette and, they're just okay for the next 3 weeks and get by for you, and then Taylor comes back in and looks like the 2021 version of Jonathan Taylor, and you never want to take him off the field, and, whichever veteran is here is saying, I don't know if I really want to be a part of this anymore because I'm never going to see the field. You can just release them at that point. It costs you nothing. They can go on to the next team that has an injured running back, and, everybody, happy ending for everybody involved. So I don't know that it does necessarily. Maybe if it is the return of Toriano Clinton or somebody in that vein, maybe that's a little more of an indication that they feel like Taylor's gonna be back. But I think that's a dangerous game to play because you got 3 more weeks, bare minimum, for him to come back. And I think that's another part with the veteran. Whoever comes in here is pretty much going to be guaranteed a good shot for 3 weeks because it's them and an injured Zach Moss. And then when Taylor comes back, the same things we were just talking about with Zach Moss. I mean, you said it, I think, last week on the pod. He's not going to come back and carry the ball 25 times in week 5. He's going to be on that pitch count, part of that rotation. So you're probably looking at week 7, week 8, week 9 before anybody who was signed in week 2 would be significantly pushed into the background anyway. So I don't know that it's a major factor. And again, with it being a non-guaranteed contract, it's as low risk as it gets.
Good point, Mike. You could sign Leonard Fournette, and I think you're right. Like, realistically, sell him. Hey, look, week 7 is maybe the earliest we think Jonathan Taylor can, let's say, get 20 carries. That'd be if he comes off pup week 5 and is able to play again, even in a limited role. By game 3, maybe you can feel good about, okay, now we'll break the 20 carry threshold and start to get back to his normal workload. That's still at least 6 games you got for whoever you're signing off the street to, like I said, put some good tape out there and get picked up by a playoff team or something like that, where I think that's a good point, George. So I think you're right in the sense that big names should not be off limits for the Colts. Now, the tough part for them is just going to be now they're in big competition with the J.K. Dobbins Achilles injury. And so now the Ravens need what is going to be a starting running back for the rest of the season, even though they're now trying to become more of an air raid offense, to put that in air quotes. That's at least a starting job you'll have if you play well the whole season, compared to, again, I don't think a trade's going to happen, George, but at least if you're a running back signing here, you got to assume bare minimum when Jonathan Taylor comes back, he'll be here. Things change. That'll be, I think, more unexpected or a bonus for that running back. But you go to Baltimore, okay, hey, look, there's no one else coming in. Right? There's no one else taking my job, whereas Jonathan Taylor is looming in the background. And I do wonder if you're Kareem Hunt, if you're Leonard Fournette, how you view the Colts and that opportunity compared to Baltimore, assuming Baltimore does come calling and does want their services. It's going to be kind of a race now. It's kind of a race, but also the Colts did it to themselves by how they handled Jonathan Taylor's situation in the first place and how they really had no viable option behind him. And we saw that Georgia nightmare scenario play out in front of us on Sunday with how bad the run game was, not just getting any yards, but also turn the ball over twice.
And we were talking all summer long about if Jonathan Taylor's in there, it changes the looks that Anthony Richardson gets, and it changes, how easy it is to develop him. You saw it right away week 1. Jacksonville played a lot of zone, and it didn't put a ton of guys in the box because they didn't feel the need to. And so it was tougher for Anthony Richardson to break big runs, which is part of the reason he did the zone. But it was also tougher for him to make reads and try to get back there. They were flooding the passing lanes on him, and he was scrambling and doing the things that a rookie does. Now, to his credit, he made far more good than bad out of that. But how much easier is it for him if there was actually somebody in the box and he could actually, have a chance to maybe take a deep shot or two, or to make a guy miss the line of scrimmage and bust off a 20 or 30-yard run himself. Also, when the running backs are struggling like that, 10 rushes for me, for Anthony Richardson's on the high side of what you want to see from him. That's I'm not good at math, but that's 170 carries for the year, which is probably going to be a bit higher than you would want him to be. But when the running game's struggling like that, you're probably going to call more design runs. And now you're opening him up to more hits. And we saw I think it was the first 12-yard run where he got the bruised knee, where he hit his left knee hit the turf, and he aggravates that at the end of the game, trying to get in the end zone, trying to fight for extra yardage. Are they calling the plays the same way if Jonathan Taylor's back there? Is the defense playing the same way if Jonathan Taylor's back there? The thing is, even when Anthony Richardson's got the carries, there's probably less guys hitting him because there's not. Do you even put the spy on him in that situation? It changes every way a defense plays, and you saw it right out of the gate. It took literally no time at all for that to be a factor.
That's a great point. It's very frustrating, George, because you're right. I look, injuries happen in football, right? And sometimes they're just non-preventable. You look at Aaron Rodgers, unfortunately, last night on Monday Night Football, getting sacked and blown out his Achilles. We believe, no official word, but everyone and their mother speculating, even Robert Saleh after the game said, we think it's a torn Achilles, season over. But injuries happen, but it's one of those things where I think with Richardson and honestly Rodgers, the same thing, the biggest Achilles heels for both teams caused the injury. Like I said, we saw Richardson now again, maybe he still runs that zone read and runs for 12 yards and still bangs the knee on the turf if Jonathan Taylor was in there or not. But like I said, he's running the ball 10 times, which is probably, I would say, bare minimum 3 or 4 times more if you had Jonathan Taylor in the backfield that you would want to run Anthony Richardson in that game. And in part, like you said, when Deon Jackson is giving you nothing and Evan Hull and Jake Funk are giving you nothing, you have no choice. But if you're going to establish a run game, use it with the only guy that's getting any sort of traction in Anthony Richardson, and you leave him susceptible to getting hurt where he got hurt in the first quarter. And like I said, now trying to keep the Colts in the game, scrambling with his legs, and gets hurt again and has to leave the game. Thankfully, it seemed like he just was left out of the game for precautionary reasons. And by that point, with 2 plays left by the goal line, no reason to bring him in. But I think you can point almost directly to the Jonathan Taylor absence in one way, George, kind of led to Richardson's exposure to hits. And you look at the Jets on Monday night, their offensive line was the biggest question mark. You watch that play where Aaron Rodgers got sacked, their left tackle, Dwayne Brown, got beat. He got beat cleanly. And that guy that he was supposed to block that just whiffed on was the one who sacked Aaron Rodgers. So it's one of those things where injuries happen. But if the Jets, which is the biggest Achilles heel was their offensive line, short up the offensive line. For the Colts specifically here, if you had a better run game or the best player on your team offensively in the game, George, you limit the hits Anthony Richardson gets. And you're right. 10 carries is not what you want your quarterback getting. And I think it's part of the reason why you had Trevor Lawrence after the game tell him, hey, protect yourself. That is the biggest name of the game. I thought for the most part, Richardson did a good job of running out of bounds. And did that a lot more than honestly I was anticipating for a rookie in his debut doing when you're trying to make stuff happen. But George, I don't know if there's, AAA team in Indy somewhere we can call the Reds, bust them over. Sliding has to be worked on here, but that all goes back to you don't have a good run game to lean on with running backs. You now ask more your quarterback and put your quarterback in harm's way more than you should.
It's funny you mentioned AAA team because I remember when Andrew Luck was here, the Indianapolis Indians offered to give him a sliding clinic on social media, just joking around. It may be time to revisit that offer, bring him out and let him slide a little bit. But he's got to be a little bit smarter. Trevor Lawrence said that after the game. His advice to Anthony Richardson was that it's not college anymore and the hits are a lot harder and you got to protect yourself. And I think specifically, I think the 12-yard run was just bad luck. That's one of those things that just happens. Your knee lands wrong and it bangs off that concrete turf at Lucas Oil Stadium, and you're going to get banged up. That's part of it. But down there at the goal line in a game that you're down by 10 points, you love the competitive fire, and you don't want to take that out of him. When he's lowering his shoulder and he's bouncing off 3 or 4 defenders, and you're thinking, maybe just go down here. Maybe it's not. It's a 4-point game. Maybe you're doing that. It's a 10-point game. Maybe ease up just a little bit. It's a tough balance because at the end of the day, and they face that with luck. Really, he didn't get it until year 7 when Frank, his last year in the league with Frank Reich, his first time that you really saw Andrew Luck start to understand, okay, maybe I do go out of bounds and don't fight for the extra yard. Maybe I don't lower my shoulder into this linebacker. Richardson's going to face that same learning curve. And I think you really have to be careful, because you want him to protect himself and you want to have the best possible chance for him to stay healthy. But at the same time, you don't want to take away something that makes him special. And part of that is that absolute fire that burns inside him, that competitive fire. So it's tough balance to strike.
I'm not saying, right, like the Jonathan Taylor absence is why you got hurt. You're right. Like, it's one of those where your knee, it is bad luck, and injuries again happens. It's a physical sport. But I guess the point I'm trying to make, George, and you hit on it basically, is like, if he felt like almost, I think towards the end of the game, I got to be Superman. Like, I got to do it myself, because especially too, I mean, it's human nature. If you're handing the ball off and you're seeing nothing and you're constantly in 2nd and 9, 2nd and 11, 3rd and 8, like, you almost know before the play is even run, if it's a run play, this ain't going to work. You watched most of the game, you get stuffed the line of scrimmage, it ain't working. And so I feel like that almost adds extra pressure in his mind of just like, okay, well, I got to make a play because no one else is going to make a play. And so like you said, it's coming from a good place. You want that. You want your quarterback to have that rather than have him quit and mail it in and just say, screw it, go through the motions and the game's over. That's where I think the presence, I should say, of Jonathan Taylor does kind of ease that from, because if you have another player you can reliably depend on, where you hand the ball off and now all of a sudden, instead of a 1-yard gain, it's an 8-yard gain. Again, I think it helps ease Richardson in his mind of, okay, if this play ain't there and I got to slide down and it's a 1-yard gain or a 2-yard loss, the drive ain't over. But honestly, with how the run game was, that is kind of the case where if you don't get a good play and first down, the drive's kind of over. And you feel like it's on me to do more and step up more. And that's where I think, again, you can kind of point the finger to the Jonathan Taylor absence, and Anthony Richardson feel like he has to do a lot more. And you could draw the connection of how he's going to put himself in harm's way more times than not, where, like you said, 10 carries is more than you want. Most times he got out of bounds. But again, Jonathan Taylor's there. We're talking about, I would say, at least 4 or 5 carries, probably less per game. Obviously, the game script changes, but on average, let's say 4 carries less a game, because Jonathan Taylor's running well. And you do the math, George, it's what, 16 times 4? 60, 70 less runs he could have in a season. You'll take that. You'll take that every time.
Absolutely. And especially in those high leverage spots. I mean, you're down there by the goal line. That's almost certainly a Jonathan Taylor carry on the last one he gets banged up on. And that's where I think that risk goes up even more, because it's tighter spaces. You're going to have, defenders selling out just to keep you out of the end zone. That's where you can really see some of these bad luck injuries happen. And there's no doubt. I mean, Jonathan Taylor can't get back fast enough. We still don't know if he'll ever wear a Colts jersey again. And that's part of why I think it's important, that this week that they bring a veteran in here who they know that, hey, worst case scenario, if Taylor's out for the year, or if he's, in Miami or Green Bay or, I don't know, Baltimore, anything that happens along those lines, then you've got this, you've got whoever it is who can help Anthony Richardson do these very same things. Not going to be Jonathan Taylor. He's one of one pretty much. But you can possibly get somebody in here who can at least take, even 2 or 3 carries away. It would be a big difference.
Adds up, right? It adds up over the course of a season, adds up over the course of a career. And you see guys like Cam Newton, who were Superman, right? Truly early in their career. Unfortunately, we saw it firsthand with Andrew Luck. I know, different style of quarterback, but still, like, doesn't matter how big you are, George, right? We see with almost any quarterback, you get worn down if you continually take big hit after big hit after big hit, year after year after year. It catches up to you. Just like Father Time catches up to everybody, those big hits catch up to every player, even now in an era where you can barely touch a quarterback, where if you even get too close and give him a kiss on the cheek, you get a flag and 15 yards. It still catches up to you. And so protection, keeping yourself healthy, getting down, running out of bounds, just taking carries off your plate, all of it goes a long way to keeping Anthony Richardson upright and still playing on a high level, not just this season, not just next season, but hopefully for the next 10, 15 years from now. And that's why it's more important than ever, like I said, to get some sort of run game going ASAP. That's where I think you're right. And hopefully they sign at least one veteran off the street this week, presumably on Tuesday. Hopefully that gives some sort of spark to the run game. And again, take some pressure off of Anthony Richardson's plate going into week 2 in Houston. We mentioned the Jets really fast here, George, before. So I want to kind of ask one more Jets question. Aaron Rodgers, unfortunately, looks like he's going to be out the entirety of the season now. Jets had Super Bowl aspirations going into the year until that injury happened. After the game, Robert Saleh said they're going to stick with Zach Wilson as a starter for the rest of the season. I don't buy that. Zach Wilson looked terrible on Monday night. He's been terrible his whole career. If you're the Colts and you're Chris Ballard, whether the Jets come calling to you, you go calling to them, would you trade Gardner Minshew if they had an interest?
Sure, Minshew for Hall, right? Just do it right now. They got a backup running back, and the Colts have running back need, and boom, just make the swap. I'm sure the conversation is going to be had, not for Hall, but I'm sure there's going to be a conversation. The draft compensation of some sort. There's a deal that could be swung there. Now, I don't know what the Jets want to do. They're facing a lot of bad options. A couple guys who were here the last couple of years, names being thrown around: Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz. How they want to handle this, I don't know. But if I'm the Colts, I saw enough from Anthony Richardson that I would not feel danger with Sam Ehlinger being his backup the rest of the way. You could even make an argument that the offense changes less if Ehlinger comes in than it does with Minshew.
The only concern I have about trading Gardner Minshew, honestly, is now I'm not in the quarterback room, so I don't know, George. But if he is leaning on his veteran presence, look, I don't know what kind of draft pick you're getting back. I know the Jets are in a desperate situation, but I don't think Gardner Minshew is going to be commanding a first-round pick, George. Hot take. So it's not like you're getting great draft capital back. If it's like a third or fourth-round pick for Gardner Minshew, again, if this is the case where Richardson truly is leaning on Minshew's veteran presence and he's helping him out really kind of help accelerate his learning curve, I would keep Minshew. Because again, for me, like 2023 is all about development and making sure going forward here, Richardson is in a good spot to succeed. If part of that is, hey, just leaning on Minshew throughout practice, even during the games, if not to get too high, not to get too low, I think to me that experience and that value Minshew brings is greater than what a third or fourth round pick could get you in the draft. I know Chris Ballard has done really well historically in those kind of later mid to later round picks in the draft, but for this season, whatever it takes to get Richardson ready, if that's a case where he does lean on Minshew, maybe I'd have a first round pick. I don't think there's a draft price high enough to lose that value for the rest of the season.
That's definitely something they got to take into account. And I don't know, I'm the same as you. I don't know what, that influence is, but if that is a factor, then maybe it's not Hall. Maybe you ask for Garrett Wilson. I think that'd be good. That'd be a good fair trade. I
mean, I asked for Jalen Waddle reportedly, so why not?
Why not?
Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner for Gardner Minshew. Who says no?
It seems like a fair deal to me.
Gardner for Gardner. Sauce Gardner for Gardner Minshew. Who says
no? Swap Gardners. I mean,
I'm in for that.
Why not? I don't see why the Jets should say no to this. I mean,
did you see that Garrett Wilson catch?
He's something else. I mean,
let me tell you, Anthony Richardson could use that.
He could absolutely. Hey, you know where he went to school, and you know who they have there now. I'm not going to bring up his name because I'm going to mention him every pod here, but you know what I'm getting at here.
His dad was kind of famous. He was okay for the Colts.
His dad was all right for the Colts. Yeah, his dad did okay here, and he had a few catches on Saturday that caught some eyes too. So, just saying, what is it? Star for Marv?
Oh, is that I like that. Is that the new saying we got? I like that, George. Star for Marv. I'm in. Now, I will not go on a hunger strike myself, but otherwise, I am all in on that. Starving yourself for wins. Let's go. That's good. That's really good. All right. Make it happen here. That's the first time I heard it, so I'm giving you credit for that.
We'll speak it into existence.
I like it. And look, I don't think it's the worst idea ever to just load up on Ohio State wide receivers. Garrett Wilson, Marv next year, Crystal. I mean, man, let's just recreate like any of like the 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021 Ohio State wide receiver rooms. I think Anthony Richardson will be just fine.
Like literally, how many teams in the league would have swapped their receiving core last year for Ohio State? or even the year before that when they had Wilson, and when they had Wilson, Olave, and Smith and Jigba. I mean, who wouldn't take that right now as their receiver room?
25 of the 32, right? Like maybe the
ridiculous.
Bengals could say we're good. Not many teams. I'm with you. Maybe maybe the Jaguars and how Calvin Ridley looked. Otherwise,
otherworldly.
It is right. It's a handful. Maybe the Seahawks. Otherwise, I know they already have Jackson Smith and Jigba anyway. So there you go. But like, there's like maybe 5 teams, George. I would say, we're good. That's elite talent, right?
Crazy. There. That's where you go to look for your receivers, right? Because there's talk. I mean, everybody knows Harrison's going high, but they may have 2 top 10 receivers. So because Ibuka is up there too. So definitely, if I'm Chris Ballard, I'm going to spend some time in Columbus, Ohio this fall.
Do you need to though? Like, honestly, I don't think you even need to. It's one of those where they're so good. Like, maybe don't waste your time, or don't give anyone like.
Don't let it out there.
Right. Like maybe you put out like, I am so out on Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, no, don't even worry about us trading up for him. Or if we're sitting there at like pick 3, don't worry about jumping us to pick 2 to get him. Like, we were so out on him, we're not even going to take him. And just pull the old dokey doke. Come on, draft season about line anyway.
So you don't think the Ursay motor coach is pulling up to the Horseshoe at any time?
Well, that's what I'm worried about. I think Chris Ballard will be sly enough to have interest, but not make it obvious. Jim Irsay is a wild card. We're like, Penn State, Ohio State next month. I could see him easily rolling up, making a big scene on the sideline, bringing Marvin Harrison to the damn game, and like, wearing like an 18 Harrison Jr. Colts jersey that he pre-ordered online. Like, Jim, I'm worried about blowing the cover here and making everyone, if they were unsure before, oh boy, Colts could be interested in Marvin Harrison Jr.
That's a fair worry. That's a fair concern.
And look, it's not that far, right? That motor coach, I'm sure, could get there, no problem, and be back for Sunday's game. So, oh boy. Yeah, that is speaking of which, like I said, I think part of the reason why, George, I was kind of out on CJ Stroud in the sense that when you look at the situations where the draft, where, Bryce Young goes number 1 to the Panthers, Stroud goes to the Texans, and Richardson to the Colts, even though Richardson was by far like the biggest question, least experienced, I thought this season of the 3 rookies where they were drafted, I thought Stroud would have the worst season, in part because what you just mentioned, his 2 years at Ohio State, he had receiver rooms that were better than 85% of what the NFL has. And so when you have that much talent they're used to throwing to, and that many guys that make plays on open compared to now when you go to Houston, and it's Robert Woods, Nico Collins, Tank Dell as a rookie, Dalton Schultz, like way less talented caliber receivers than when you had in college. That's part of the reason why that's a big adjustment to make, where I don't think he's going to really adjust well in year number 1. And I know it's one game and we'll see it up close and personal here on Sunday in week 2, George, but I think of the 3 rookie quarterbacks, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, not only do you feel best about Richardson's debut, also you look at Stroud, I think that's the one where he's going to have the toughest uphill battle here on year number 1, and should make you feel better about where the Colts got Richardson and how so far he looked in his debut.
I was shocked. We were talking a little bit before the pod. The fact that he set the franchise record for completions and for completion percentage in a rookie making his debut, those are the 2 things that you pretty much thought he was going to struggle with. I mean, that's coming in. It was okay. He's gonna be hit and miss. He had 64.1%, I think, something like that.
64.8. 64.8.
So costing him 0.7 right there already.
Big difference.
Hating on the rookie. That to me was the biggest surprise. Call it 65% of his passes. That's really impressive. And I think that's something that for a guy that supposedly wasn't ready, that definitely is inexperienced, you saw that grow throughout the preseason, and you saw it there on the field, because he didn't just do that, against Arizona, who almost won, by the way. I don't know what they're doing. That's no way to tank for Caleb Williams. No. But, he did it against a good Jacksonville defense, against the team most likely to win this division, and against a team daring him to make mistakes. I mean, they were sitting back saying, go ahead, force something, throw us a ball here. And he took what was there and, was patient. It speaks to his maturity. It speaks to his pocket presence. I thought, are there things he can work on? Absolutely. It wasn't perfect. There's no question about that. I'm sure he'd like to get a deep shot before this season is over. But I thought on Sunday he was about as good as you could expect him to be. I know, after the game, I probably am more impressed now than I was even, immediately after the game.
I'm with you. Like, and that's part of the reason why I think, like, even though they lost by double digits and Richardson himself had an interception, like, that's one where I think, like I said, you feel optimistic and you see the vision this team had when they drafted him of what he could be. And like you said, too, like, when you look at everything, right, in totality, when you look at what Bryce Young has around him, who he's going against in the Falcons, what CJ Stroud has around him going against the Ravens, and when you look at what Anthony Richardson has around him, where you had no semblance of a run game whatsoever, the run game is on your shoulders, literally, to lead the team in carries and also yards, or not carries, excuse me. Deon Jackson had that, but still 13 carries, 10 carries. You're basically a de facto, 1A in the run game.
Closer than you want it.
You're right. Way closer than it should be. Without a doubt. Like you said, the Jaguars were baiting him basically into being impatient, trying to force one in there and make multiple bad decisions. And really, outside of the pick, George, that he threw, it wasn't like he had 3 or 4 probably should have been interceptions, but it was dropped, or he got lucky. That was really, he made really, for the most part, one bad decision. It's like you said, where we kind of were giving our game predictions on Thursday. We both said, high 50% completion percentage, like just try and keep the bar low. And he looked comfortable, made good reads for the most part. And like I said, looked way more advanced and ready than I think most people thought coming out of draft day, frankly.
It's week 1, and you don't take too many conclusions from week 1, but he looked the most ready of any of the rookie quarterbacks on Sunday. Now, that could change the rest of the year. Ryan Leaf came out of the gate hotter than Peyton Manning as well. So, you don't want to make a parade or anything yet, but he did what they asked of him for week 1. And I would argue even the interception was more of a physical error than it was a mental error. I think he knew what he wanted to do, and I'm not sure he made a bad read. He just thought he could throw the ball over that corner, which he can. He just didn't make a good throw. And he said it himself. And that is going to happen. That's
right.
Life in the NFL. Guys make you pay for mistakes. But I would rather have a physical error than a mental error. I think, from a coaching standpoint, I could live with that a lot better.
Oh, 100%. Like I said, just put a little more arc on the ball if you want to kind of get it over the DB and underneath the safety there and drop it in. Like I said, that's just more about technique and practice and part of a little bit of the inaccuracy we talked about Richardson. But like I said, if he's reading the defense well, which for the most part he did, and was not getting, for the most part, confused, which it didn't look like he did on Sunday, again, against a feisty, good Jaguars team, like, you feel pretty good so far. Like I said, it's going to be a roller coaster, right? One game is not going to we can't extrapolate his week 1 performance and expect now him to play like that every single week throughout the season. He'll have games that are way better. He'll have games that are way worse. And we saw at the end of the year at Florida, he had was 9 of 27 against Florida State. I'm sure one of those games is going to be in there where just nothing's working for him. Just as Mike Tomlin said after their game against the 49ers, they got their teeth kicked in. That's going to happen to Richardson. It's going to happen to every rookie quarterback. But definitely, like I said, you feel, I think, where you're starting from, I think, is a further point along than maybe we anticipated in training camp when the draft happened. And it's just good to see so far, like, you're starting equal, if not ahead, of the 2 quarterbacks that were taken above you that were supposed to be more pro ready than you were, which I think where a lot of the optimism does come from. And maybe the learning curve, like I said, is less sharp than we thought, George, which is awesome. Awesome to see. And you kind of spin it forward to the AFC South. Obviously, they played the class of the AFC South on Sunday, lost, but played the Jaguars tough, especially for 3 quarters. And you look around the rest of the division, Tennessee Titans did not score a touchdown. Ryan Tannehill, 3 picks in their loss to the Saints. CJ Stroud struggled, again, not surprising, against the Ravens. And their loss to Baltimore also didn't score a touchdown. Like, look, long way to go. It's week 1. A lot of anomalies and a lot of misleading results happened in week number 1. But George, I think coming out of just week 1, as you get ready to go into week 2 against the Texans, if you're the Colts, I think you could start thinking to yourself, we have a chance here if we put things together and become a little more consistent on offense to be the second best team in the division. That's still not saying much. It doesn't mean you're going to be a playoff team or come close to pushing the Jaguars for the division, but you could be, I think, further along than the Texans and even maybe the Titans here at the end of the season, which I think is a big win for this team.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could make a power ranking right now and put them number 2 in the AFC South. I don't think that would be
crazy, right?
Crazy right now. And honestly, we've been talking about that defense on Sunday a lot. If you go back to the post-game pod that was live, how impressive the defense was. They go up 17 points through the first 3 quarters of that game. And you could really look back to an error on a punt return and an interception in their own territory that leads to 31. That's a pretty impressive day. If they get that kind of defensive performance every week, and they get this version of Anthony Richardson every week, and they add a run game to it, the schedule's not difficult. We have said that many times. It is not a murderer's row of a schedule. Could they get whispered into the playoff picture? Could they be one of those teams in the hunt on the graphic? I don't know. It's a lot of ifs, and it's one weekend. So just as easily, they could be in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, or at least the ability to trade the pick away. But I think if this defense week in and week out can give the effort that it gave on Sunday, and Anthony Richardson can take what the defense has given him and make right decisions for the most part, and they can supplement all of that with even an average running game, they're at least going to be a tough out.
They are. And I think, again, that's the biggest thing you can ask for this season. Like, be a tough out, push no matter who you're playing, push teams. And again, I think for the week number 1, I think maybe even a better test will be the second time they play the Jaguars. I think week 6 off the top of my head. Maybe that's going to be a better test to see where this team truly is, because again, week 1 teams come out flat. You're still trying to, work new players into the system. Kind of, you don't play a lot of preseason. So it's still kind of basically a de facto preseason game, whether it's the first time everyone's playing a full game. But if you are able, for the most part, George, let's say to replicate week 1 again in week 6, or even if you lose, but it's one of those kind of honestly reverse what the Jaguars have been doing to the Colts for a long time, where even when the Colts win and beat the Jaguars when they were 1-15, 2-14, a bad team, you grinded it out and made it tough. If they can replicate that in week 6 and do it for the most part of the season, again, even if the wins aren't there, like we talked about, but you're now a scrappy team, that is, I think, the best case scenario you can ask for. And it's kind of almost reminiscent in the way of, like, I would say Deon Sanders in Colorado. But I don't know if you had any expectations. I did not. And so now you see him start 2-0. The Pac-12 is, I think, the best conference in college football. So I don't think they're going to be competing with USC and Utah and Oregon and Washington to win the Pac-12 conference. But if we're talking about them going 6-6, 7-5, 8-4, and a bowl team, that's a win. I know there's no bowl games in the NFL, but we're talking about a Colts team that's 6-11, 7-10. Even if you're not in the playoff picture, but you're putting things together and making strides to where you are maybe clearly the second best team in your division. Like, that's a big win, George. That's, to me, a big win here in year number 1.
Especially if you get hot in December, and then that's where you're really picking up pace and you get some momentum going into next year. I think there's no doubt about that. Also, it's kind of ironic that the Pac-12 is the best conference in college football in the last year of its existence, but that's how it goes sometimes.
So Pac-12, it hurts.
It really is crazy in college football and crazy in the NFL. And that's even this next week is going to tell us a lot. And it starts spinning it forward towards Thursday's podcast. This is a totally different matchup. It's a totally different team. We're not going to get into the weeds here with it, but for the first time this year, I think there'll be expectations to win the game from the fans. Now, not from the bookies, 2-point underdogs, I think, right now in Houston. But I think there's reason to go into that game and feel like the Colts could and maybe should pick up a victory next week in Houston.
I was just going to say, I'm excited for behind enemy lines on Thursday, because I am truly that's a line where I'm truly dumbfounded. Where it's again, it's 1 week, and you're talking about still 2 rookie quarterbacks, and the Colts are going on the road for the first time. I get it. But coming out of that game, George, I expect them to win on Sunday. Again, we talk about wins and losses don't matter. So I'm not going to say the season's over or be ranting and raving if the Colts lose to the Texans on Sunday. But it's one of those things where I think from what you've seen from week 1, you would like to see even a small step forward in week 2 against a lesser opponent on both sides of the ball. That should be a game where the defense has their way with the Texans offense and holds them. Here's a hot take, George. Bare minimum holds them to under 31 points in that game. And the offense, again, should have your way with them defensively. The defensive line should not be that big of a problem for the Colts offensive line. I mean, you can't run the ball any worse than they did in week number 1. So by default, no matter who's back there, you should run the ball better in week 2, which should make Richardson's life a little bit easier. And we'll dive into it more Thursday, George, but that's one where I feel like the confidence is coming in where, again, it's not the best opponent in the world, don't get me wrong, but I am at least expecting to win this game on Sunday, which honestly is a good spot to be.
I think it's changing the way you view this team. And great, it's week 1. You take all of that with a grain of salt. We know that. And we're not predicting Super Bowls or anything like that. Now, I do wonder, you said you're not going to rant and rave. You're not going to be upset if they lose. Will you, though, order a Marvin Harrison jersey if they lose on Sunday?
You know what? Might have to. Now, the only question is going to be, the reason why I might not is I don't know what number he's going to wear. Right? He's 18 right now at Ohio State. I don't know if Peyton's going to be the most grateful, let's say, and nor I think Peyton should lend his number out. I don't know if you flip it and go 81. I don't know if you just go straight 8 and assume Juwan Winfrey's not going to be in the team next year. That's the only thing holding me back, George.
Just go 88. I think he's got connections there. I think he can get that one.
Do you want to make be your own man? Maybe they can make 80 like the Cowboys 88. Like all the great receivers in Dallas wear 88. Michael Irvin, now you have CeeDee Lamb. Maybe you can do it where now 88 is like the great Colts wide receiver number. We got to earn it.
In that case, he should wear 13.
A lot of options here.
There's a lot of options. Put him in 12. Reclaim that number.
Make it. That'd be ballsy, huh? That'd be a hell of a move. That'd be a hell of a move.
There's numbers all over that. That's true though. You can't order it there, but no, I mean, in all reality, I think you feel like going in there, like you said, they should take a step forward defensively. They should take a step forward offensively. I think last year doesn't necessarily matter, but it certainly came into play. The results of last season rushing against Jacksonville certainly were reflected on Sunday. They had a 100-yard rusher in both games against Houston last year. Jonathan Taylor in the opener, Zach Moss in week 18. So at the very least, the running backs might outrush the defensive line next week.
I like that. That's a standard. I like that. That should be the goal in week 2. Do not have DeForest Buckner with his 26-yard fumble return for a touchdown be your leading rusher next week. That George Wright. No. Anthony Richardson can throw 10 picks in the game. Overall, the game be a win because at least the running game, whether it's somebody, Deon Jackson, anyone, has more rushing yards than your defensive tackle. You talk about managing expectations, George, and setting the bar low. I don't think I've ever heard a lower bar in the history of my life than having it just be a running back outrush your defensive tackle.
But it wasn't cleared in week 1. That's why the bar is set there now.
That's true. You're right. Holy cow. This team they truly make the unbelievable believable. That is for sure. Really fast here.
Maybe the player of the year too. I mean, just so you know that may be the player of the year. It's week 1 and you don't take much from week 1, but the one thing I am going to take is for the Colts, the Buckner touchdown's the player of the year.
Sack, forced fumble recovery, touchdown run. Unless Anthony Richardson makes like 10 guys miss, or runs out of like a sack, basically on one foot, falling backwards, throws the ball 80 yards for like an insane touchdown. No pressure AR. You're right. Outside of like those two possibilities, unfortunately, the highlight of the season could be a week 1 defensive tackle touchdown with Buckner making a few moves and diving to the goal line. Oh boy. Holy cow. Finally, speaking of the defense, George, this has been a Grover Stewart Stan pod, but it's also, I think that Stan group is starting to grow defensively. Zaire Franklin, again, to show him a little bit more love, 18 tackles flying around the ball, George. Move over Grover Stewart. He may have some company now in the Stan fan group here.
It definitely has to be a Zaire Franklin standpoint. What a great story, too. I mean, you talk about a guy that came up, paid his dues on special teams, became a captain on that side. When he got his chance last year to start, all he did was set the single season franchise record for tackles. And now comes out in week 1 this year and 18 tackles, a forced fumble. He had a pass defense. He didn't score a touchdown. I guess there's that. He's still behind Buck in the touchdown. But outstanding day for him. And also Shaq Leonard back on the field, 8 tackles, tackle for loss. But I think more importantly, that juice that he brings week in and week out was there. They didn't have that at any point last season. You could feel it with this defense. Shaq Leonard makes a real difference just by being on the field. Zaire Franklin makes a real difference by tackling everyone in sight. The defense was the bright spot of the week, and I think you have some real obvious reasons for why that came to be.
That's been one of the strengths for the Colts now for a while, and you see really the depth and also in development. Like you said, Zaire Franklin was special teams guy. Like I said, got his first real opportunity to play last year and only broke some records of doing so. So it's a big, obviously, hat tip to him, but also Gus Bradley and this defense of coaching staff for developing him and getting him in a position where once he did get his opportunity, he's ready to capitalize, and they put him in a position to succeed, and he is taking off and running. And like you said, he's taking the pressure off Shaq Leonard, which is crazy to say that someone else is kind of making Shaq's life easier, because it's been the opposite. Shaq makes everyone else's life on the defense easier. And it only, again, makes this defense to the point where you do expect good things this year, because now it's like you are giving the Maniac time to basically get his feet wet again, get his sea legs, if you will. And now, again, second leading tackler Shaq was behind Zaire Franklin, which is, again, good to see in his first true game back, where he played a lot of time and was moving around good. 8 tackles in game number 1. He's only going to get stronger. And if, I don't know, by week 4 or 5, he's like truly back to 100% and now is a game wrecker. George, watch out, man. This is going to be a good defense. This should be on paper a good defense, especially even with the questions in the secondary. They showed you, I think, a really optimistic view here in week number 1.
And you wonder, can these corners be the next guys to develop and take advantage of a great opportunity with Dallas Flowers and Darrell Baker getting this shot? I don't expect them to set franchise records this year, but can they take hold of the opportunities that they have? And in week 1, they did. I mean, granted, Calvin Ridley had a day for the ages, really first half for the ages, but he's Calvin Ridley. They may not face a better receiver until they get to Cincinnati in December. So it's, there was a lot of reasons for optimism on that side of the ball, and you feel like it's a young group and they've got nowhere to go but up. And
the last thing I'll say is I think you hit the nail on the head of why there's optimism with the secondary is, like you said, Calvin really torched him in the first half. Torched him. Right? Was it 7 catches, almost 100 yards, but he finished the game with 8 catches. Like, he had 1 catch in the second half, and that's it. So like that is one of the, like you said, the better receivers and receiving groups you'll play this year. And the second half did a lot better limiting him specifically. And now you go to Houston in week 2, where, again, there's no game-breaking wide receiver, where there's no one with the talent of a Calvin Ridley. That should be one where you go in with confidence. It's like, you know what? We can be the best unit here. We're going to win this matchup of receivers versus DBs. Even though for the most part, it's, the second start for a lot of the guys. Again, at least on the outside, you should carry that and feel confident of going into that game. Like, we will win this matchup. And like I said, we talk about development. There's going to be a lot of downs, right? But when we talk about the quarterback, how does Anthony Richardson react after a bad drive or a turnover? How does the secondary react if they get burned for a deep touchdown? How do they respond after maybe a bad half or a bad drive? I think so far we saw both sides of the ball question marks, how they respond in the right way. Respond in a positive way, either making a play, not turn the ball over. Again, limiting Calvin Ridley, especially in the second half. Like, they are learning, which that's the biggest thing. Mistakes are going to be made, but the bigger question is, how do you respond after those mistakes? I would say, George, after week 1, test for week 1 passed, at least in that sense. It's a new test every week, but the first one, you feel pretty good how they responded.
And that's what makes week 2 so interesting and so important, because now as a team, they can respond to week 1 and you can see, can you back up? Can you do the good things? Can you do those well again? And can you clean up some of the areas that you struggled in? That's the challenge for every team every season. But for this team in particular, right now, I think that is the story of the season. Can they get better from week 1 to week 2 and from week 2 to week 3? And our first chance to find that out comes next Sunday. And I think everyone should be pretty excited about that.
Very excited. Cannot be more, honestly, truthfully, excited for a Colts-Texans matchup where neither team is really expecting a lot. This should be a fun and interesting matchup for sure. We'll get you covered on Thursday. Behind Enemy Lines is back. We'll get you all set for a second straight division game, first road game for Anthony Richardson in his career. Should be a lot of fun now. We'll get you set for Colts-Texans week 2 matchup on Thursday's pod. So again, make sure you subscribe to the Blue Horseshoe podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out on YouTube as well. As a reminder, YouTube will be the exclusive home of every single post-game reaction. So make sure you subscribe, and every single game you'll check out me and George giving our instant reaction to that Sunday's game. So we'll talk to you on Thursday. Have a great week. I just ruined my own tease, George. So you know what? My week 1 to week 2 performance has gone down. Hopefully the Colts do not repeat what I just did. So I'll keep it simple and say, we'll talk to you on Thursday right here at the Blue Horseshoe Pod.